I took the job because I needed the money. That's the truth, and I'm not going to dress it up. What I didn't know was that behind that door was a man who hadn't let another human being touch him in 3 years. Not a hand on his shoulder. Not a hug from his own sister. Nothing. They warned me he'd send me away within a week. Like he'd sent away the 6 caregivers before me. They didn't warn me about his eyes, or the way he said thank you like the words hurt him more than his injury ever had. I didn't expect to fall for the man I was hired to help. I didn't expect the first time he really let me in would be the quietest, most ordinary moment. Steam on a bathroom mirror, his hand shaking around mine. I told myself it was just part of the job. It wasn't, but what happened next changed my life forever. The house sat at the end of a gravel road outside town, half swallowed by pine trees that never seemed to let in enough light. My name is Eli Rourke, 26, and by the time I pulled into that driveway I had already failed at 2 other jobs that month. Not because I wasn't good at my work, but because caring for people had started to feel like standing too close to a fire I used to love and now couldn't stop flinching from. The agency had been blunt with me. "He's difficult," said Marguerite, the woman who ran the placement service, tapping her pen against a folder like it was a warning label. "Julian Ashworth, concert pianist. Car accident 3 years ago, lost most of the strength in his left hand. He doesn't need medical care so much as he needs someone who won't quit on him. Everyone quits on him. Why? Because he makes it very easy to." I should have listened to the tone in her voice. Instead, I told myself I needed the paycheck more than I needed my pride, and pride had never kept the lights on. The porch light was off when I knocked, even though it was 7 in the evening and the sky had already gone the color of a bruise. I waited. I knocked again. When the door finally opened, it wasn't wide, just enough for a sliver of face and one narrowed brown eye. I didn't ask for anyone new, the voice said. Low, a little rough, like he didn't use it much anymore. "I know. I'm here anyway."
Eli Rourke.
I held up my bag like it was proof of something. "I don't need a nurse." Good, because I'm not one. I'm an aide. I make coffee, I remember which pills go with food, and I leave when you tell me to leave, but I don't leave because you're rude to me. I've had ruder. That got the door to open another few inches. Enough that I saw him properly for the first time. Tall, sharp-jawed, dark hair overdue for a cut, and a left arm held close to his body in a way that told me more than any chart could. He looked at me the way you look at bad weather rolling in. Something to endure, not welcome. "You'll last a week," he said. "Probably," I admitted. "But I'll make good coffee while I'm here." For a second, just a second, something almost like amusement crossed his face before he caught it and put it away like a man closing a drawer too fast. He stepped back from the door without inviting me in, which I decided to take as an invitation anyway. The house smelled like dust and old sheet music. In the front room sat a grand piano, lid closed. A fine layer of neglect settled over the black wood like frost. I didn't ask about it. Some things you have to be given, not taken. "Kitchen's that way," Julian said, already turning to go, favoring his left side like it cost him something to be seen straight on. "Don't touch the piano." "Wasn't planning to. Everyone says that." He disappeared down the hallway before I could ask what he meant, and I stood alone in a house that made it very clear it didn't want me there, and somehow that only made me more determined to stay. By the end of my first week, I had a list. Don't touch the piano. Don't ask about the accordion of scars along his left forearm. Don't comment on the fact that he ate standing up at the counter instead of at the table, like sitting down meant staying somewhere too long. Don't offer to help him with his shirt buttons, even though I watched him fight with them for 4 full minutes one morning before he gave up and wore the shirt half open under a sweater instead. Julian Ashworth did not want to need anyone. He'd built his whole life since the accident around not needing anyone, and I was, in his words, an inconvenience his sister insisted on. His sister's name was Corinne. She called every Sunday and I answered because Julian never picked up before the 4th ring. Like he needed that long to arrange his voice into something that wouldn't worry her. "He hasn't fired you yet," she said to me on the phone one evening, sounding almost surprised. "That's a record. He's tried."
"I'm stubborn."
"He used to fill rooms, she said, quieter now. Before, he'd play and people would stop whatever they were doing to listen. Now he won't even let the piano tuner in the house." A pause. Just don't take it personally. Whatever he says. It was never about you. I didn't tell her that I already knew that. You learn to read grief the way sailors read weather. The pressure changes before the storm ever shows itself. What she didn't know, and what I didn't tell anyone, was that I understood a version of that house better than my resume let on. 2 years before, my younger brother Sam had died in a climbing accident, and I had spent the following 18 months auditioning every possible way to be useful to other people so I wouldn't have to sit still with what happened to him. Caregiving wasn't a career I'd chosen so much as a place I'd hidden, which meant that when I watched Julian refuse my hand on the stairs, refuse the offer to carry his groceries, refuse, always, flatly, immediately, any help with his left arm, I didn't see stubbornness. I saw a man doing exactly what I did, just from the other side of the mirror. You watch me like you're studying for a test, he said one night, catching me mid-glance as he attempted, badly, to open a jar of tomato sauce. I watch everyone. Occupational hazard. That's not an answer. It's the one you're getting. I held out my hand for the jar. He didn't give it to me. He kept twisting until his knuckles went white and his jaw tightened with something closer to fury than effort. And then, all at once, he set it down on the counter hard and walked out of the kitchen without a word. I opened the jar myself, quietly, and left it exactly where he could find it later. He never mentioned it. But the next morning there were 2 coffee cups set out instead of 1, and I understood that in this house, apologies didn't come as words. They came as small, deliberate kindnesses left where you'd notice them. I decided I could work with that. It was in my 3rd week that I heard it. Music, faint, coming from somewhere upstairs at 2 in the morning when I'd gotten up for water. Not the grand piano. That stayed shut and silent like a coffin nobody would bury. This was thinner, smaller. A recording. I followed the sound to a door I'd never seen open. Julian's study, tucked at the end of the hall, the one room he'd never once let me clean. Through the crack in the door I saw him sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, an old cassette player beside him, his right hand pressed flat over his eyes. The recording was piano. Fast, intricate, alive in a way that made my chest ache before I even understood why. And underneath the music, faint, a young man's voice, laughing, saying something I couldn't quite catch, followed by Julian's own voice, younger, warmer, saying, again, from the top, and this time don't rush the left hand, you'll ruin the phrase. I realized, standing there in the dark hallway, that I was listening to a recording of Julian playing. Of Julian before. I must have made a sound, because his head snapped up, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I saw something in his face that wasn't guarded. It was raw. Caught. Get out, he said. But his voice cracked on the second word, and it didn't sound like an order so much as a plea. I didn't get out. I don't know what made me stay. Maybe the same thing that used to make me sit outside my brother's door those last few months. Not saying anything, just making sure he knew someone was close by even when he told me to leave him alone. I sat down in the hallway, back against the doorframe, not looking in at him, just present. I'm not going to make you talk, I said. I'll just sit here a while. There was a long silence. The tape kept playing, that younger Julian's laughter looping under the notes. Then, quietly, that's me. 6 years ago. Before. Another pause, longer. I used to be able to play that piece in under 4 minutes. Now I can't even lift a coffee cup without my hand shaking. What happened? I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, flat, like reciting a fact he'd repeated so many times it had lost its edges. Car accident. Black ice, a truck, a hospital, 6 surgeries, and a hand that will never work the way it used to. My partner at the time told me 2 months in that he didn't sign up to be someone's nurse. He left on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd been practicing for a Thursday concert I never played. The words sat in the hallway between us, heavier than anything he'd said in 3 weeks. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it more than I'd meant almost anything. Everyone's sorry. His voice had gone hollow. Sorry doesn't play the piano. No, I agreed. But it's not nothing, either. He didn't answer that. But he didn't tell me to leave again, and when the tape finally clicked to its end, he didn't reach to play it a second time. He just sat there, in the dark, and let me sit there with him, and something in the house shifted, quiet, invisible, like the first crack of ice starting to give. After that night, Julian didn't become a different person. He was still sharp-edged some mornings, still snapped when I moved a book on his desk half an inch from where he'd left it. But something had loosened. He started leaving his study door open a crack. He started answering Corinne's calls by the second ring instead of the fourth. And he started, very occasionally, letting me help. It began small. He let me carry his coat when his hand seized up from the cold. He let me cut his food when the restaurant we tried once served a steak he couldn't manage with one working hand and refused, out of pride, to ask for it pre-cut. He never asked for these mercies. He simply stopped fighting me for the space to give them. "You're doing that thing again," he said one evening, watching me refill his glass before he'd finished asking. "What thing?" Anticipating me, like I'm a puzzle you've solved. "You're not a puzzle," I said. "You're just a man who's been alone with this for 3 years and forgot people can hold things for you without it costing you something." He looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "Where did you learn to talk like that?" "My brother," I said, before I could stop myself.
Sam.
"He died 2 years ago."
Climing accident.
I spent a year trying to fix everyone else so I wouldn't have to feel anything about not being able to fix him. It was the first time I'd said his name out loud to anyone outside my family in a year. Julian didn't offer platitudes. He didn't say he was sorry, not the way everyone else did, like checking a box. He just reached across the table with his right hand, careful, deliberate, and set it briefly over mine. "That's why you're good at this," he said. "Not because you studied for the test. Because you know what it costs." I didn't trust my voice to answer. We sat there, his hand over mine, the restaurant noise going soft and distant around us, and I understood, with a clarity that frightened me, that I was no longer just doing a job in that house. I was falling for a man who had spent 3 years teaching himself not to need anyone, and I had absolutely no idea what to do with that. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, which is how the most important things in life always seem to arrive, dressed as nothing special. Julian had thrown his back out reaching for a book on a high shelf, refusing, as always, to ask me to get it for him. By evening he could barely straighten, his left arm useless for balance, his right hand the only thing keeping him upright against the doorframe. "I need to get in the bath," he said through gritted teeth, "and I cannot do it alone, and I would rather set myself on fire than say the next sentence, so please don't make me say it twice." "You don't have to say anything," I said. "Just tell me what you need me to do, and only that." He exhaled, and something in his shoulders came down half an inch, like the permission itself was a weight lifted. "Just help me get in and out. That's all." I want to be clear about what that hour was, because it would be easy to imagine it as something it wasn't. There was nothing performative in it, nothing charged in the way people might assume. It was steam fogging the mirror, and Julian gripping the edge of the tub with a hand that trembled from strain rather than cold, and me steadying his weight without commentary, without pity, without treating his body like a tragedy. It was ordinary care, offered without flinching. But somewhere in that hour, something shifted between us that had nothing to do with the water. "You're not looking at me like the others did," he said quietly, eyes fixed on some point past my shoulder. "Like I'm something broken you're managing." "You're not broken," I said. "You're a man who's had a hard 3 years and hasn't had anyone stay long enough to notice you're still in there." His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought I'd overstepped. Then, so quiet I almost missed it. "Nobody's touched me like this. Like it's just a fact, not a favor. Since before the accident." His voice caught. I'd forgotten what that felt like. I helped him out when he was ready, wrapped a towel around his shoulders, steadied him at the sink. And when he looked up and caught my reflection in the fogged mirror beside his own, neither of us looked away first. "Eli," he said, and my name in his mouth sounded like something he'd been rehearsing. "I don't know what to do with the way I've started looking forward to you walking through that door every morning." "You don't have to know," I said, my heart going wild against my ribs. "Not tonight. Tonight, let's just get you warm and let your back rest." He nodded, but his eyes stayed on mine a beat too long before he looked away, and I understood, standing there in that steam-fogged room, that something had begun that neither of us could pretend our way back out of. I should have expected that Corinne would notice before either of us said a word. Sisters usually do. She showed up unannounced on a Saturday with a casserole dish and eyes that moved between me and Julian like she was reading a book she already half knew the ending to. "You're different," she said to her brother. Once I'd stepped into the kitchen to give them privacy that I could still overhear through the doorway. "You're, I don't know, present. You haven't been present in 3 years, Jules." "Don't," Julian said, but there was no real warning in it. "I'm not going to say anything you don't want me to say. She paused. I heard the scrape of a chair as she sat down across from him. "I have to tell you something, and I don't know how you're going to take it. Corinne, do you remember the online forum you used back after the accident when you couldn't sleep? The one for musicians dealing with injuries? You told me once there was someone on there who talked you out of a very dark night. Someone who never gave you their real name." Julian's voice went careful. "Six strings. Yeah. I remember. That was Sam," Corinne said. "Eli's brother. He told me about it once before he died. Some stranger on a forum he'd been talking to for months. A pianist who'd lost the use of his hand. He never knew the man's real name either. But he kept every message. Eli found them in Sam's things after the funeral. I think he's been carrying pieces of you around for 2 years without knowing it was you." I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, the casserole dish forgotten in my hands, my heart slamming against a truth I hadn't seen coming. Because I did remember. I remembered finding a folder of saved messages on my brother's old laptop, printouts of a stranger's words about grief and music and the terror of losing the thing that made you feel like yourself. I remembered reading them after he died, needing to understand who my brother had been talking to in his last dark months, and feeling, absurdly, grateful to a nameless person I would never meet. I hadn't known his name either. Until now. Julian's eyes found mine across the room, wide with the same disbelief crashing through me. "Six strings," he said, quiet, stunned. "Your brother was 6 strings. You talked him through it," I said, my voice unsteady. "Whatever you said to him, it mattered. He kept every word." Neither of us moved for a long moment, the weight of it settling strange and enormous between us. That before I ever walked through his door, before I ever knew his name, some earlier version of us had already reached across the dark for each other and, without knowing it, held on. I want to tell you that discovering this connection made everything simple. Didn't. If anything, it cracked something open in Julian that took days to settle. "It feels like fate is laughing at me," he said one night, sitting at the closed piano, not touching it, just resting his good hand on the lid like it was a grave he visited out of habit. "I spent months telling a stranger online how to survive losing everything, and I never once thought to save myself the same way. And now that stranger's brother is standing in my kitchen every morning, and I don't know if I'm falling for you, Eli, or falling for the idea that maybe I get to be forgiven for surviving when your brother didn't." "You don't have to earn forgiveness from me," I said. "I'm not angry that you're alive and he isn't. I never was. Then why does it feel like there's a debt?" "Because grief makes math out of everything it shouldn't," I said. "You don't owe me for something you didn't do. And I don't want you to love me because you feel like you owe my brother something. I want—" My voice caught and I made myself finish it. "I want you to want this because of us. Not because of him. Not because of guilt." Julian was quiet for a long time. Then, "I'm terrified," he admitted, so softly I almost missed it. "Not of loving you. Of what happens after. The last person who said he loved me left within 2 months of the accident. What if you stay long enough to actually see all of it? The bad mornings, the hand that will never work right, the man who still can't play the one thing that made him feel like himself, and you leave anyway. I don't think I survived that a second time. I'm not him," I said. "I've already seen the bad mornings, Julian. I've held your weight in a bathtub and helped you dress on days your hand wouldn't cooperate. I'm still here. That's not an accident. That's a choice I keep making every single day." He looked at me like he wanted, desperately, to believe it, and was terrified of what it would cost him if he was wrong. "Play something for me," I said suddenly. "Not to prove anything. Just one hand however it comes out. Let me hear you, not the recording of who you used to be." His whole body went rigid. "I can't. You can. It doesn't have to be good. It just has to be yours." For a long, long moment I thought he'd refuse. Then, slowly, like lifting something impossibly heavy, He opened the lid of the piano for the first time in 3 years. His right hand found the keys easily, muscle memory older than the accident. His left hand hovered, trembling, refusing to commit. I can't do the left-hand part, he said, voice thick. It's ruined. It'll sound wrong. Then let it sound wrong, I said. I'm not here for perfect. I never was. He started to play. Right hand alone at first, something slow and unfinished, full of long silences where the left hand should have answered and didn't. It should have sounded incomplete. Instead it sounded like grief set to music, honest in a way his old recordings, for all their brilliance, had never let themselves be. And then, hesitantly, his left hand came down. Just one note. Slightly off time, slightly too soft. Nothing like the man in that old cassette tape. But it was there, filling a silence that had waited 3 years to be filled, however imperfectly. He stopped playing abruptly, hand shaking, and put both hands in his lap, breathing like he'd run a mile. That was terrible. That was the first time I've ever heard you sound like a person and not a memory of one, I said, and meant it with everything in me. He looked up at me, eyes bright with something that hadn't cracked open in years, and said, Eli, I don't want you to be my caregiver anymore. I don't think I can pretend that's all this is. Then don't, I said. Be honest with me instead. I'm in love with you, he said. Like the words cost him more than the accident ever had, and like saying them was the bravest thing he'd done since. I think I have been since the bathtub, if I'm honest, or maybe since the hallway outside my study, or maybe since the moment you told me the jar of sauce could stay unopened and didn't make it mean anything about me. I don't know when it started. I only know I don't want to keep pretending it isn't happening. I crossed the room and knelt in front of the piano bench so we were eye to eye, and I took his left hand in both of mine. Not to help him, not to steady him, just to hold it, trembling and imperfect and entirely his. I love you too, I said. Not because of Sam. Not because of guilt. Because of every single ordinary day I've spent in this house learning who you actually are underneath everything you survived. He kissed me then, careful, uncertain at first, like he was relearning something he'd been sure he'd lost the right to, and I felt him let go, finally, of 3 years spent bracing for the next person to leave. Love, once spoken, doesn't erase the hard parts. 3 weeks later, the agency called with a decision I hadn't asked for. Julian's care contract was ending. His insurance review had concluded he no longer required assisted care, a phrase that felt both true and devastating at once, because it meant I no longer had a professional reason to walk through that door every morning. You could just stay, Julian said, watching me pack up my AIDS bag for what the agency insisted was the last time. Not as my caregiver, as whatever this is, whatever we are now. I want that, I said, more than I know how to say. But I need you to be sure it's me you want, Julian, and not just the fear of being alone again. Because if I stay and this is really about not wanting to be by yourself, I think it'll break both of us eventually. It was the hardest thing I'd said to him, and I watched it land, watched him actually consider it instead of reacting to defend himself, which told me more than any answer could have. I've been alone in this house for 3 years, he said slowly. I got very good at it. I could keep being alone, Eli, if I had to. I want you to know that because I need you to believe I'm not choosing you out of desperation. I'm choosing you because for the first time since the accident, I look forward to a version of my life that isn't just about surviving what happened to me. I look forward to Tuesdays. I look forward to bad coffee and jar lids and you telling me my playing is imperfect and letting that be enough. He took a breath. I'm choosing you because I want to, not because I'm afraid of the alternative. Then say it once more, I said. Not because I doubt you, because I want to remember exactly how you sounded the first time you chose someone on purpose. I choose you, Eli Rourke, he said, steady this time, sure. On purpose. Every day if you'll let me. A year later, the piano in that front room is never closed anymore. Julian still can't play the way he used to. His left hand will never fully recover, and some days it aches too much to try at all. But he plays anyway, imperfect and unhurried, and I've learned that the sound of him choosing to try again and again, is more beautiful to me than any recording of who he used to be. We kept the old cassette tape. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, he plays it beside his own imperfect playing now, the past and the present sitting in the same room without either one erasing the other. Corinne visits most Sundays and no longer calls to check if he's still alive in there. She comes now because she wants to, and the difference is not small. People ask me sometimes how it started. How a man who let no one touch him for 3 years ended up letting a stranger into every corner of his life. I tell them the truth. It wasn't one grand gesture. It wasn't fireworks. It was an ordinary Tuesday, and a bathroom fogged with steam, and a man deciding, for 1 hour, to let himself be held without flinching. He let me care for him. And somewhere in the middle of the most unremarkable, tender hour of my life, everything changed. Not because either of us was looking for a love story, but because we were both just trying, in our own broken and honest ways, to stop being alone with what we carried. That's the part the title never tells you. It wasn't the bath that changed everything. It was what came after, the choosing over and over on ordinary days long after anyone was watching.